Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into our talks on Dark Web with Dark Web issue 1. And for this one, there's a lot of stuff going on, as well as a few things that we gotta catch up on along the way. So as this playlist continues, I'll definitely be filling you guys in on some of the extra things that pop up that we may not have talked about yet. And we'll cover those as we make our way through. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with how this begins, we start off with seeing both Ben and Janine out and about doing a bit of Christmas shopping, and then suddenly the two of them run into Peter Parker and Mary Jane, which right off the bat is pretty weird because Peter Parker and Mary Jane are no longer together. Again. And in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, Issue 1, we find that she's with a dude named Paul, who has 2 kids, and really ever since, the communication between the two of them has been pretty rough, if not non-existent. And later on in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, Issue 9, Peter asks Mary Jane why can't they just talk like old times, and at the time she let Peter know it's because she's with Paul. And of course then Peter's like, okay, you love this guy so much that you can't even talk to me. To where then she goes on to tell Peter, it's not about you, it's about responsibility. So yeah, their situation is pretty much a mess at this point, and we'll get back to that before this is done. But with Ben and Janine running into Peter and MJ, this takes a turn really quick, because suddenly Peter tells Ben that he's gonna need his stuff back. All of it. And from there he just snatches Ben's hair off his head, his lips off of his face, he takes back his eyes, he takes back his brain, and all the while both Mary and Peter are mocking Ben, telling him that he's a nothing person in a nothing place. But then suddenly we find that all of this was just a terrible nightmare that Ben had had after dozing off in Limbo. But as soon as he wakes up, he's met by Madeline Pryor, who lets him know that emotions have power here. And in Limbo, pain and regret are currency. And for Madeline's pain and regret, she's focused it all into the Scythe of Sorrows, which is what she uses to command the demons of Limbo. And she lets Ben know that in order for her magic to work above as planned, she needs to focus Ben's hurt into energy. And in response, Ben lets her know that if pain is energy, then he's full of it. And from here going forward, for Madeline Pryor, the Goblin Queen, the clone of Jean Grey, and Ben Reilly, who's now known as Chasm, the clone of Peter Parker, this is about more than just taking back what they believe was stolen from them, but it's also about getting revenge in the process. But after this, we then head over to the Coffee Bean, where Liz has invited everybody on December 13th to remember the late Harry Osborn on his birthday. And of course, while they're here, Peter and Mary Jane see each other, since Liz had invited all of Harry's friends, and given the circumstance, MJ and Peter more or less agreed to have a ceasefire, because today's more so about remembering Harry, rather than the two of them getting into it. But when Peter goes to buy a coffee for Mary Jane, come to find out it's already paid for by a sulking Norman Osborn. And from here, with Peter going outside to talk to Norman, I kind of feel like we gotta talk about what's going on with Norman Osborn at this point. Because at this time, with him saying that he's missing Harry and how that he knows that it's his fault and he feels bad about it, and he even goes as far to say that with him having to experience the clone of his son dying, for him it was like karma for everything that he had put Peter through. And I gotta say, for Norman, this is coming from a very sincere place. And the story about why is pretty ridiculous. Because not too long after Norman Osborn was the Red Goblin, when that was done, he had pretty much gotten away with everything after blaming it all on the Carnage symbiote. And then well after this, heading into Devil's Reign, Mayor Fisk had made Norman Osborn a consultant at the rebuilt Ravencroft Institute, to where eventually Mayor Fisk would make Norman Osborn the director. But also at this time, Sin Eater, who had recently been resurrected by Kindred, which had also given Sin Eater the ability to purge criminals of their sins. And at that time, he had got a bunch of followers, who from there started this huge riot. But for Sin Eater, his sights were set on Norman Osborn. And for a while, Peter helped protect Norman from Sin Eater. But when Norman started talking slick about Ghost Spider, who's Gwen Stacy from Earth 65, Peter had had enough of Norman's mouth. And he was pretty much just like, you know what, we was gonna help you get away. But with Norman saying things as if he was gonna make Earth 65 Gwen Stacy shared the experiences of Earth 616 Gwen Stacy, it was right then when Peter gave Norman Osborn the Jazzy Jeff Fresh Prince treatment, which from there just left him at the mercy of Sin Eater, who effectively purged Norman of his sins, which from here had caused Norman to feel regret and remorse for everything that he had done. And after having his sins purged, he turned over a whole new leaf. He started trying to make more attempts to reach out to his grandson Normie. He gave Peter Parker a new job, as well as a brand new suit. which came with a built-in glider as well as a number of other spiffy technological advancements. But overall, Norman Osborn was doing everything that he could to pretty much make up for all the bad that he had done. And eventually these events had led to Norman becoming the Gold Goblin. Because after having his sins shot out of him by a magical shotgun, initially Norman Osborn did not want to get back on the glider. But then after one instance when Peter was nearly killed and Norman refused to suit up, the next time that this was about to happen, Osborn went in to help using a prototype spider suit that was gold and white, which was also equipped with a glider. And it was from there where Osborn had then became the Gold Goblin. And really for me, even though Norman Osborn has had this change of heart, I can't help but to think that it's not a matter of if, more so than when, he's just going to fall back into his old ways. But nonetheless, for the time being, as it stands right now, with him showing himself to be remorseful, it's really coming from a sincere place. But then after this, we then head back over to Limbo, where at this time, Madeline Pryor is letting Ben know that they're going to be getting a bit of additional help. And it's here where she lets Ben know that this help will be coming from their newest ally, Eddie Brock, who, like we'd seen in our talks on Venom Volume 5, Eddie's willing to do whatever it takes to make his way to his son Dylan. But unfortunately, as we know, the moves that Eddie's making are taking him closer and closer to him eventually becoming Bedlam. And I wouldn't doubt that that's beginning right before our eyes, because as Madeline comes here with Chasm to speak to Eddie, she tells Chasm to close the door, and she tells Eddie that his mind carries a great weight, and she's gonna help him by lightening the load. And I mean, with hearing that right there, it really sounds like Eddie getting one step closer to Bedlam, who, like we'd seen in the pages of Venom, only had one thing on his mind, and that was rage. But after this, we then jump back to Christmas in New York, where we find the X-Men doing a bit of last-minute holiday shopping. But while they're out here enjoying the holiday, they then begin to hear evil magical organ sounds, which is then shortly after followed by a number of inanimate objects coming to life, which is my favorite kind of Christmas. But shortly after this, we're shown that this of course is coming from Madeline Pryor, who, like we'd seen when she told Ben Reilly, she's channeling the hatred, the pain, and the regret in order to fuel her attack in New York. And for Madeline Pryor, with her doing this, it's really priming the stage for her attack. Because it's not like she can directly just go in and attack the X-Men's treehouse. Because when Magic gave up her throne in Limbo, she had made Madeline Pryor more or less make a promise that she wouldn't attack Krakoa, which includes the X-Men's base in New York, the treehouse. And for that reason, Madeline Pryor is allowed to go there, but not if she has ill intent. And at this time, with Limbo let loose in New York, Jean recognizes this power and she knows that it's Madeline Pryor, even though she doesn't sense Madeline's presence. But also rather quickly, Magic starts to feel a bit of regret, because before she had left Limbo, she believed that Madeline Pryor had changed. But with all these crazy attacks continuing, Peter Parker, who's nearby, takes notice, and when doing so, he suits up and makes his way to the rooftop, where he then notices that Rockefeller Center is just in complete chaos. But then meanwhile at this time, Ben Reilly, aka Chasm, has now made his way to Norman Osborn. And for Ben, like he'd mentioned before, even though he's lost a number of memories which he had got from Peter Parker, there still are some memories that make their way to the surface. And again, for Ben, they're usually painful ones, which in most cases involve the Green Goblin. And it's for that reason why Ben is going for Norman. And when he gets here, Norman tries to suit up as the Gold Goblin, but Ben gets the jump on him and he kicks him in the back. And surprisingly, Norman doesn't need a bacchiotomy. But at this time, he is able to distract Chasm with the Gold Goblin glider just long enough for him to get suited up. But then it's here where Chasm lets Norman know that prior to this moment, he had posed as Peter just to get close to Norman's gear, and he sabotaged it. So he triggers an explosion and then climbs on top of Norman and just gets to working this guy. And Ben tells him, since you out here trying to make amends for all the wrong that you've done, I'ma give them to you one punch at a time. And from there, Ben gives Norman a punch for every issue of Spider-Man that the Goblin's ever been mentioned in. And I mean, I'm joking, but he probably did. It's a lot of punches. But then after this, we find that Madeline Pryor has made her way to Earthrealm with Hollow's Eve, as well as Venom. And Madeline is already noticing that Eddie is not ready to stick to her plan. Because at this time, with her quote-unquote taking a load off of his mind, this has brought Eddie back to like your classic Venom days. So now all he's thinking about is killing Spider-Man. And Madeline mentions that the next step of her plan she has to do before Chasm is finished, who, by the way, Chasm is still getting those hits in this whole time. But now with Venom kind of going off on his own and going after Spider-Man, this now has Madeline thinking that she may have taken too much off of Eddie's mind, because now Eddie is very much in classic Venom mode and he's ready to eat Spider-Man's brains. And I gotta say, like, when I first seen this, I was like, okay, it's kind of a plot device, but I mean, it is. But at the same time, it still works because it's going right along with what we'd seen going on in the Venom series. Because like we'd seen, present day Eddie would not intentionally turn into Bedlam without trying to find another way to help Dylan. So to me, it makes sense that he's fallen under these circumstances in Dark Web that'll eventually take him to the next stage of his transformation. And again, I'm here for all of it. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.